Rhydon, use Fisher. The gym floor shook beneath Rhydon's feet as it let out a tremendous bellow. If this move hits... All at once, an enormous crack opened in the earth. A gaping maw stretched across the gym floor, speeding rapidly towards the move's target. Closer, closer, and the fissure opened up beneath the opposing Blastoise, sending it tumbling down untold feet into the darkness below. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the tear was gone. The gym floor shone flawlessly under the cold synthetic light, and Blastoise was nowhere to be seen. The opposing trainer's tears fell swiftly now, splashing silently onto the pristine tiling on which its Pokemon had vanished. Where's Blastoise? Where did he go? The trainer was staring listlessly at the ground, refusing to move an inch. He was obviously in shock over the sheer magnitude of his defeat. Giovanni would have to remedy this. Pay up, kid, ordered Giovanni in a low voice. The trainer acquiesced resignedly, forfeiting half his life savings into Giovanni's waiting palm. But he still refused to leave. Go home, commanded the leader, now slightly irritated. You're holding up the line. The trainer looked about himself in a dazed state and noticed the challenger standing behind him. A small black-haired boy of perhaps 10 years of age. Oh, sorry. I didn't notice, mumbled the defeated trainer with a small nod, and he at last began to pace resolutely back towards Jim's front door. Giovanni turned his attention to the black-haired boy, who had stepped forward. He was wearing a red jacket over a black t-shirt and a red and white cap pulled low over his eyes. Giovanni was intrigued by this challenger. Something about him was unsettling. Something about his slow, measured pace and expressionless visage seemed somehow alien. But that was of no consequence. Nobody had ever defeated Giovanni's main team, and he was not about to let this child become the first. Welcome, spoke Giovanni in a cool, intimidating tone. I am the Viridian City Gym Leader. Do you dare challenge me? Giovanni rose to his full height. I am the greatest trainer the world has ever known. I defeated countless thousands in this very spot. Thousands upon thousands of championship dreams, terminated right where you're standing. And yet you still dare to forever risk your only aspiration by blithely challenging my undefeated team? The speech had been delivered flawlessly, and Giovanni felt quite proud of himself. Surely, the child had now realized the insignificance. Surely, he was at this moment quaking in his boots. And yet, the challenger showed few outward signs of his distress. Giovanni's oratory had reduced countless grown men to snivelling, crying imbeciles by means of that very speech. And yet, here was a child, a whelp no more than 10 years old, standing his ground. Rather than break down, the challenger nodded and stepped noiselessly forward. The effect was disconcerting, and Giovanni's voice displayed an imperceptible faltering. Very well then, let us begin. Giovanni threw his first Pokeball. A stream of crimson light issued forth from the Pokeball, quickly coalescing into Giovanni's Rhyhorn. Rhyhorn was Giovanni's usual lead, and had served him admirably in the past by gauging the strengths and identifying possible weaknesses of his opponents. The terrifying spectacle of the 3-foot-tall Rhyhorn's single-minded charge attack had caused many to resign the challenge by terror itself. But the child stared unflinchingly at Giovanni's Pokemon, and threw down a Pokeball of his own. But there was a problem. The device was malfunctioning. This was unheard of. Pokeballs were made on an assembly line now, and, as Kanto's only major export, each Pokeball had to be flawless. Those with faulty machinery, but without exception weeded out somewhere in the manufacturing process. As a former head of Sylph Corporation, Giovanni knew that. So, what was wrong with the child's Pokeball? Instead of releasing the customary beam of light, the Pokeball was shaking eccentrically, without any discernible rhythm, and emitting periodic bursts of red light from its central seam. As bloody sparks jumped across the surface, the Pokeball seemed ready to explode from the pressure of whatever was inside it. Suddenly, the Pokeball released its laser. But instead of the customary red, it was a pale and sickly orange. When the light faded, Giovanni caught his first glimpse of the thing that the Pokeball had vomited. It was a pile of trash, just sitting there on the floor of the gym. Without warning, and before Giovanni could get a closer look, the pile of trash expelled a stream of pale brown coloured liquid, hissing and spurting as it did so. "Water gun," commanded the challenger. The fluid squirted through the air and impacted Rhyhorn squarely in the face. Giovanni's face betrayed his worry. Rhyhorn did not usually survive any decently powered water or grass type moves. Yet, Rhyhorn didn't falter. The pile of trash's special must have been completely pathetic for Rhyhorn to take such a small amount of damage. But something was wrong. Something was off about Rhyhorn after the brown liquid contacted him. Giovanni could sense it, though he couldn't quite discern what it was. Something seemed different about the shape of Rhyhorn's back, or the pattern of his armor plates. Giovanni only truly became alarmed when Rhyhorn did not turn its head as usual to receive orders. He stood unmoving, frozen to the spot from which he had received the attack. Giovanni walked around Rhyhorn to examine his face, and found it scrambled, with no discernible features. Various pieces of eyes, mouth and nose were scattered haphazardly around its ruined face, which resembled a disassembled jigsaw puzzle on a featureless grey background. Giovanni was aghast. "Rhyhorn? Rhyhorn, use Fury Attack!" Rhyhorn? Rhyhorn had not fainted, and showed no signs of collapse or fatigue. But he was clearly dead. Giovanni could not look at the horror that his Pokemon had become, so he returned it to his Pokeball. He could not lose. His team was undefeated, and this thing would surely not prove a challenge to his stronger Pokemon. He decided immediately to move up a tier in strength, and so summoned Nidoking from his Pokeball. Nidoking emerged with a savage scream, but Giovanni's attention was focused on the pile of trash. As he searched for a weakness, he came to a sudden realization. Most of what he had previously assumed to be trash consisted of discernible pieces of various Pokemon. Here was a Bulbasaur tail, there was a Pharaoh beak, and a Blastoise arm, all haphazardly stitched together in some kind of abominable mass and mixed in with other things. Things that he couldn't recognize. There were letters and numbers, pieces of signs and buildings, and chilling geometric patterns that he couldn't even begin to identify. And it was distinctly larger than it had been 30 seconds ago. With each passing second, the thing grew. It was a slow process, but the pile of trash appeared to be steadily expanding without any external source. But maybe that was just a trick of the light. Giovanni didn't even know where to look for a weakness, or what such a weakness would even be. But he did know that this monstrosity had somehow been stopped. So he ordered Nidoking to attack. "Nidoking, use Thrash!" Nidoking looked around for a moment, wondering where the attack was even directed. Nidoking was considerably smarter than Rhyhorn, smart enough to notice that there weren't actually any other Pokemon in the arena. Nidoking turned to look at Giovanni, who presented with what might very well have turned out to be the last time he ever saw Nidoking whole, felt a sudden surge of regret. He pointed ruefully at the pile of trash, which had taken on an unmistakably crimson hue. Giovanni had seen it before, he thought, but he could not remember when. Nidoking never got his close look at his foe. He was not one to disobey his orders, for Giovanni was a hard master. And so, Nidoking charged. He rammed fist after massive armor-plated fist into the thing, but it showed no signs of any external damage or fatigue. It just sat there, glowing. As the word popped into his head, Giovanni knew what was about to happen. He tried to shout, and tried a second too late to warn Nidoking of his fate. But Nidoking was so absorbed in its thrash attack that it had failed to notice. And so, the end came quickly. "Sky attack," said the challenger. His lips, Giovanni saw. They didn't move when he talked, but remained frozen open. In fact, he had not moved at all since the battle had begun. Giovanni suddenly began to wonder if he even could. The boy's clothes were becoming distorted, becoming numbers and letters and Pokemon fragments one piece at a time. There were endless, mesmerizing geometric patterns in his eyes. Nidoking flew through the air and smashed against the ceiling of the gym with a reverberating crash. The culminated light from Giovanni's Pokeball intercepted the hapless Pokemon before the floor could. Giovanni did not want any opportunities to get a good look at the remains of his Nidoking. If only he had chosen a different move, Nidoking might have been saved. The trash was not just larger now, but spreading. The walls were splattered with it, oozing with Pokemon, and Giovanni's pristine floor was covered in refuse. As Giovanni reached uncertainly for another Pokeball, he discovered that his hand no longer fit securely around it in the position to which he had long been accustomed. For even he had not escaped the trash's corrupting influence. His hand, though retaining its general shape, was gruesomely disfigured. A Weezing's face, a Wigglytuff's ear, and an Arcanine's eye, along with other body parts too damaged to identify, protruded from his skin in tortured, hideous combination. Giovanni tried to scream, but no sound came out. He fumbled with his Pokeball and tossed it onto the floor haphazardly, a novice trainer once again. Rhydon emerged, but even he was not free of the trash's scarring. His skin had a reddish tint, and his spikes were misaligned with the ridge of his back. Giovanni could not order an attack, but he did not need to. Rhydon was incapable of movement, as Giovanni himself. Across the arena, the opposing trainer no longer bore any resemblance to a black-haired human being. He was already consumed. A pile of trash in a hominid shape. Only the cap remained, pulled low over where the trainer's eyes once were. Giovanni could just make out the black, embroidered capital letters printed on the front. "Future Pokemon Master," the cap read. The boy's lips could not move, but the trash's attack came anyways. It let out a hideous scream, torn from the larynx of nearly every Pokemon in Kanto, savagely twisted and ground together to form a single, unending screech. As the monster grew larger still, its cacophony had grew louder, and Giovanni's consciousness was fading fast. The walls of his gym turned to sludge, and Giovanni felt his body beginning to crumble around him. Rhydon was melting beside him, and the trainer and his Pokemon slowly merged into a single puddle of liquid death. The trash filling his vision at last invaded Giovanni's final thoughts as he saw the world disintegrate, and the abomination consumed all. A mighty warrior walks across a desolate field, pondering to himself. He thinks of the war he has left behind him, which has decimated the mightiest empire of the day to the point where it could never recover. The glorious empire and its proud warriors, now nothing more than flesh for pestilence to infect, bones for famine to pick, and dust for death to claim. What power has war when war ends? When those who can wage war are all dead? Hunger soon strikes him, and the only meat he sees is a mouse hole in the ground. He reaches inside the hole and pulls out a tiny mouse, no bigger than his own hand. When he moves to kill the mouse, the tiny thing bites him with all of its might. The warrior barely feels it, but he is amused at the tiny creature's defiance. Such a tiny thing, fighting against what is undeniably a hopeless situation. Such a bold thing deserves more than dull teeth to defend itself, the warrior thought to himself. Using power it had taken from a battle long before, war infused the tiny mouse with the power of lightning itself. So the story goes. At least, this version of the story. There is a version for every animal, plant, fish, and insect in the known world. And in a sense, all of them are true. Whatever the initial inspiration had been, war began an experiment that would shape the world forever. When one asks a supposedly wise human scholar what war is, they will claim that the real face of war is soldiers dying in trenches of dysentery, starving on the marches for pointless causes, a sniper killing a hapless fool before he can accomplish anything. But war is none of those things. Those are the domains of his brothers: famine, pestilence, and death. Inevitable side effects of war, but not war itself. No. War is battle. It is a duel. It is strength. It is power. It is swords clashing, will tested. It's courage and ferocity, facing one another and proving their mettle with all their might. With every strike, every blow, every battle, war is empowered, and his servants with him. But war knew that, as things were, he could not strengthen himself without strengthening his brothers. Death he could do nothing about, but famine and pestilence, neither of whom he trusted, would always follow in his wake, feeding off the fallen before devouring the victors like carrion birds and scavengers. Was it possible for him to create a war that wouldn't end up fueling his treacherous brothers? He soon came up with an idea. Battles that could start, end, and repeat again and again, with countless outcomes that didn't involve death and disease tainting his victory. A world defined by fighting. It took time before his plans fully came to fruition. Several unimaginative humans regarded his servants as merely another weapon, using them the same way as he'd used their original tools. But the problem with weapons that could think was that they might begin to think that you aren't fit to wield them. Realizing that they couldn't call themselves the strongest anymore, they acquiesced to the demands of war and his servants. After a few examples had been made, of course. First and foremost, the humans had to prove themselves individually worthy. There would be no inheriting of warriors because of family names, no handouts due to abstract concepts, no purchases to favor the rich. You want a fighter? You have to earn it. It wasn't hard to come up with a way to make them work to get war's servants. They had to come and find them, and then they had to fight them, before they would even consider obeying the humans. They had to brave the weather, climb the mountains, forage and hunt themselves. They had to prove that they were strong and capable enough to handle the creatures they wanted to command. And even after that, they had to take good care of them. proved themselves worthy and responsible owners. Those who weren't soon learned how fragile they actually were. Other things began to shape themselves as time went on. The church was still in power, after all, and they wouldn't let this new movement pass without co-opting it. So, the battles became about fighting representatives of the 7 deadly sins: wrath, lust, greed, etc. 7 trainers with specific gimmicks and types that would symbolize their respective sin. Once they were defeated, they gained a small sigil of their triumph that they would use to shed a drop of blood in honor of war. They eventually became pins that they could use to prick themselves easily. When did it become 8? Many have asked. My theory is the 8th sin was blasphemy. A few humans, idiots at best and heretics at worst, got it into their heads that they could tame the gods the same as the other creatures. At least 3 cities were destroyed as a result of this foolishness, and 7 sins became 8. Naturally, trainers needed yet another way to filter out the best of the best, so they had another part of their journey. Anyone who could triumph against their own sins would battle against the 4 representatives of war: famine, pestilence, and death. Once they had defeated all of them, they would become God? The church never liked that part. It hardly mattered what they liked after a while. Their God and their church soon fell out of favour. But the battles continued. Even as the metaphors of sins and harbingers fell away, even as the sport became commercialised, even as children became the primary source of training, the fights remain. And really, that is all that matters. In the end, all trainers serve war, including my own. Some wonder how Ash would feel about knowing that. He's the sort who would claim that war is a terrible, monstrous thing to be avoided. But the battles we regularly participate in are different because of friendship. Still, that naivete can be forgiven in a child. At least he understands that it's our efforts that he gains his glories. Certain other trainers have gotten it into their heads that they and they alone are responsible for victory, regarding us as nothing more than tools for their glory. Arrogant fools. But they'll learn soon. I've been hearing rumblings among my fellow servants of war. Murmurs of a poison seeping through the tournaments. Heretics and idiots repeating the mistakes of the past. Brats and bullies seeking to circumvent the rules so they gain more power for themselves. They need a lesson in just who made those rules in the first place. And if they won't learn, Ash may need to learn how to appreciate war very soon. It was when I was younger, when I got my first Pokemon game. I remember my excitement when I opened the blue ribbon off that shining red gift, revealing a fresh copy of Pokemon Black. Quickly, I popped my game into the DS and began to play. Those were wonderful times. Every single pixel on that game was a new adventure to me. When I first played, I picked Tepig, and I named it Tep. I loved Tep. He was like my best friend. I always cherished him every chance I had. In fact, he ended up having max happiness. Since I wanted Tep to stay cute and small all the time, I always pressed B every time he tried to evolve. I did the same with most of my team, since I didn't even know what an Everstone was. At the end of the game, my team was Tep the Tepig, Lily the Lillipup, Aud the Audino, Ven the Venipede, which I replaced with a Victini named Teeny, and Tick the Shiny Joltik, who I found randomly when I was grinding Chargedome Cave, and of course Reshi the Reshiram. Yeah, I was bad at nicknames. However, one day, I sadly lost the cartridge to the depths of my couch. After that, I went into a deep sadness and began to block Pokemon out of my life. It was like I'd actually lost someone to lose Tep. But eventually, I recovered, and slowly, I forgot about Pokemon. I had succeeded in keeping Pokemon away from my life, but in the process, I'd forgotten about my team. Lily, Aud, Ben, Tick, Teeny, and Reshi and Tep. But one day, I came back to the franchise. It began when I was much older. I was browsing the store and found a copy of Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon. Of course, I picked Sun because it looked cooler. I had so many adventures when I played that. I was very good at the game, and I mastered it quickly. My final team in this game was a Decidueye, a Blissey, a Gengar, a Talonflame, a Zygarde, and finally, my Solgaleo. Several Pokemon had to be swapped out for stronger ones. Stronger, more powerful ones, more capable for lasting battles. I swept through the Elite Four like a gentle breeze. The champion was a bit of a challenge, but it wasn't that much of a problem. After playing through the game, I completed the Alola Pokédex and replaced almost my whole team, besides Solgaleo of course, with Ultra Beasts. Beside one of them, which instead I replaced with Magiana. Even Decidueye. I don't really care about that mushy love Pokemon stuff. Just what Pokemon are stronger and or rarer. One day, however, I found that dusty old Pokemon Black cartridge. I found it, tucked deep under my couch. The sticker was scratched up and in tatters, covered in a thick layer of dust. Swiftly, I blew the dust off the cover of the black cartridge. Sweet, I mumbled. Free game. With a soft click, I removed the Pokemon Sun cartridge from my DS, pushing the Pokemon Black cartridge into the slot, and soon, the game booted up. When I saw I had a continue option, me being my curious self, I clicked it. It seemed that I had saved last in the Pokemon Center. Quickly, I opened up the menu and selected Pokemon, revealing my party. Sweet! I had a shiny Joltik, a Reshiram, and a Victini all within the same team. But I wasn't very interested in the others. Really? A Lillipup, an Ordino, and a Tepig. Even worse, the Tepig was level 100. I had no chance of evolving it. Trash, I thought. Then I got an idea. I'd release the ones I didn't want, and keep the goodies. I walked over to the PC and opened it up. The only Pokemon in there was a single Venipede named Ven. Ugh. Clicking on Ven, I quickly pressed the button to release it, and it faded away. Suddenly, a text box appeared. Ven? Huh? I thought. Must be some sort of glitch. I ignored it and released Audino. Another text box appeared. Aud? This was getting freaky, but I ignored it. Next, I released Lily. Lily! This was getting really creepy. I didn't care. Last, I released Tepig. Tep. No! And the Tepig faded away from my party. I swore I began to hear a soft sobbing noise, but I barely paid attention. I closed out the menu and began to transfer up the Pokemon. Afterwards, I wiped the save file and removed the Pokemon Black cartridge. As I removed the cartridge, I swore I heard a soft voice whisper, "Why?" into my ear. Now, I had lots of fun messing around with my new Victini and Reshiram. He swept everybody. People even called me a hacker for having those two Pokemon. But I didn't really care. My team was overpowered, and it was completely legit. However, every time I won a battle using my Victini and Reshiram, I could have swore I heard a quiet voice saying, "You kept them. Why not me?" But one day, I seemed to make the voice furious. I was chatting with one of my friends, John, by the festival plaza, teasing about how Emboar sucked, and how it looked stupid with that big chubby bell and all those dark brown poofs. I then brought up that I released a level 100 Tepig named Tep, on the same game I got my Victini and Reshiram from. John's response was, "Lol, that was brutal," if I remember correctly. Suddenly, my screen began to flicker and glitch, and a text box appeared. Brutal, it was. How could you release me? Huh? Was the first thing that flew through my head as I read that. I typed to my friend, "Hey, I just got a creepy text box." John responding, "Lol, not me." Then another text box appeared. Why? A loud sobbing wail echoed throughout my ears, making me jump out of my chair. Then somebody got into a link battle with me. But it wasn't any normal trainer. It was a Tepig. But it wasn't any normal Tepig. It had scars all over its body. Its ears were shredded up. Blood even leaked from its nostrils, and tears of blood were trickling down its cheeks. It had a look of dread on its face. A text box appeared, and what it said truly disturbed me. Abandoned Pokemon Tep wants to battle. It was the very same Tepig that I released. Quickly, I sent out my Buzzwole, hoping that I could deal with the Tepig quickly. Tep got the first turn, and the Tepig used a move I'd never seen before. Tep used Painful Screech. A loud, heavy, distorted and slowed down Tepig cry blasted out my speakers at max volume, making my heart skip a beat. The animation for the move seemed to be Tep coughing out blood. It did no damage to my Buzzwole though. Then another text box popped up. Buzzwole runs away in fear. Using its wings, Buzzwole flew up and off the screen, and automatically switched into my next Pokemon. My next 4 Pokemon, it did it again. Guzzlord runs away in fear. Xurkitree runs away in fear. Solgaleo runs away in fear. Magearna runs away in fear. My last Pokemon were Reshiram and Victini. This one I sent out first was my Victini. Yet again, Tep used Painful Screech. It made the same gruesome noise to the same gruesome animation. However, instead of running away, my Victini did something else. Teeny feels sorry for Tep. Suddenly, the battle turned into a double battle. Tep was accompanied by my Victini, also known as Teeny. My battlers were Reshiram and my character. What the heck was my trainer gonna do? Then, yet another text box popped up. Teeny used Fusion Flare. The normal, regular Fusion Flare animation played as a massive burst of fire was fired at my character and my Reshiram. However, its effects were different. My Reshiram and my trainer had dropped to the floor. Their skin had been heavily burned, especially my characters. They were just laying on the floor, blood pooling under them. 2 text boxes then appeared that confirmed all my worries. Reshi passed away. You passed away. That made me jump. What the hell? I expected this sick, twisted Wi-Fi battle to end by now. But no. It continued. Tep. Teeny, how dare you? Huh? Another text box appeared. Tep used Slaughter. Tep then pounced on Teeny, blasting a fiery beam of blazing hot flames into its face. Once Tep was done using the move, Teeny's body now resembled my character in Reshiram's, heavily charred. Teeny passed away. Tep flopped onto the ground, like a fainting Pokemon. I swore I heard the loud noise of somebody crying throughout my entire house. A text box then appeared. Tep. What have I done? What Tep did next shocked me. Tep used suicide. He shot a blast of fire at the ground below him, causing a massive flame to engulf him. Once the fire stopped, Tep was laying on the ground, dead like the others, and yet another text box appeared. Tep passed away. The game faded into a picture of my character, Reshi, Teeny and Tep, all laying in a pile in a dark stone room. Blood was sloppily smeared in the text that read "Game Over" on the wall. Then, there was a loud crack as the game faded to black, and so did my love of Pokemon. Have you tried the Castelia cones? They're really good. You should check them out before we leave for Nimbasa. I heard they're pretty good, but aren't they hard to get? Nah, not if you got friends. Vermilion gave her companion a wink. It was their third and final day in Castelia City, and Claire still hadn't tried a Castelia cone. To be honest, she wasn't too thrilled at the prospect of travelling to Unova with Vermilion. Although they were friends, they weren't exactly birds of a feather. To have a friend at home see her with such a person, she shuddered inwardly at the thought. What do you mean by friends? Let's just say you can get them in places other than those street-side stands, she said somewhat elusively. I shrugged it off as some little-known restaurant she had found that sold the delicacy. They really had become a delicacy. They were so hard to get that the price had raised dramatically, and few people had actually tried one in their lifetime. Where is this place? I'll show you, Vermilion giggled. This way! She ran off down a side street, and Claire, taken by surprise, hesitated and then darted after her friend. Vermilion was acting strange. Why was she so eager to go? They were going to go shopping, and that was Vermilion's favourite thing to do. Claire quickly caught up to Vermilion, being in a simple but nice pair of jeans, while her friend was in a dress. She almost tripped in an attempt to avoid the red flowing fabric twice. Cursing quietly, she managed to stay behind her friend, although at a somewhat uncomfortable pace. The grime-covered windows whizzed past them, and the tall skyscrapers gave way to tiny shops, with a narrow gap in between them that could hardly be called an alleyway. Rusty dumpsters flew in and out of sight, and Claire got a glimpse of eyes from within them every once in a while. How much further? Vermilion replied with what Claire saw as a somewhat demented grin. Not long. Not long, she sang in a sickly sweet voice. Vermilion suddenly screeched to a halt, and Claire almost slammed into her. An old screen door greeted them, which led into an old dilapidated building. Is this a place? With a nod, Vermilion stepped in. Inside was a bit fancier than the outside, although there were a few shady looking characters within the building. It was surprisingly packed for such a small and out-of-the-way restaurant, with at least 10 customers crowding into the small space. Vermilion slid over the counter and greeted the man behind it. Ah, Vermilion, long time no see, he said. He wore that same grin that Vermilion wore, and Claire was starting to get creeped out. Ah, and I see you brought a friend. What brings you here? The Castelia cones? Something about the way he said Castelia cones was extremely disturbing. Oh yes, of course I did. Well, why don't you let us give you 2 of them on the house, for the sake of an old friendship, he said with a wink. No thanks. I need to step outside for a moment, stammered Claire. No, I insist. Here. The man handed her an ice cream cone. Well, this might be her only chance. She reached out for it and took it, shivering as she realised the cone itself was made of ice. Go on, what are you waiting for? She slowly sunk her teeth into the soft treat, her eyes widening. It was amazing, but as she did so, she heard a high-pitched squeal and looked at her Castelia cone, her beautiful, delicious... The Castelia cone had a face. With a scream, she dropped the vanillite, and its fragile body shattered on the tile floor. Another squeal sounded, but this time it was cut off abruptly. Claire didn't care. Was this why Vermilion was grinning so sadistically? How could her friend do such a thing? She ran out of the door in an attempt to escape the horror and shock she just experienced, her boots thundering across cracked pavement. She finally made it out of the alleyway, losing herself in a crowd of people. She didn't dare stop running until she had returned back to her hotel room, locked the door, and grabbed her phone. Thank Arceus she and Vermilion had rented separate rooms. She punched in her parents' number and pressed the phone to the side of her head. Closing her eyes and quietly pleading for them to answer, she hugged her knees to her chest. They didn't answer. Frantic, she tried again. Still, she was met with their voicemail. The same thing happened with her brother, her closest friends, and even the police in the hotel itself. She figured that she would have to do things herself and ran to the door. It was jammed. In a frenzy, she began looking for something to help her open it. She dug around in the plain wooden desk for something to pry open with. When she turned around, she found herself staring into a pair of red-orange eyes, set in face with a sadistic grin spread across it. Want another Castelia cone? Asked Vermilion. The scream ran throughout the hotel. I went to town with my friends one day. We were looking in the shops and buying stuff. Me and one of my friends saw a game shop and went in. Only us two though. None of the others were really interested in games. My friend saw the Nintendo games and called me over to have a look at them. Then, I saw a game on special offer. It was second hand, but it didn't matter. It was Pokemon Heart Gold. My friend already had a copy, but I hadn't, so I bought it. Admittedly, it was weird how it was only £1, but I soon got that out of my mind. When I arrived home from shopping with my friends, I quickly grabbed my Nintendo DS and took Soul Silver out of the game cartridge, and slotted in Heart Gold. The little scene played and brought me to the start menu. The person who had originally played this had a playtime of 30 minutes, and was a male called Death. I shrugged. Whoever had played this game must just be trying to scare young children. So, I clicked on the data and the game played. I found myself in Route 30, and there was an Eevee following me. I clicked on their Pokemon and found they only had an Eevee named Reaper. It was only level 7, so maybe they were just lucky to find an Eevee, and maybe they had the start in the PC, or perhaps traded it for this Eevee. I was curious about this, so I walked my sprite to the Pokemon Center, went up to the PC and turned it on. I went through their boxes. They didn't have any Pokemon in there, only this Eevee named Reaper. I figured that they had probably traded their starter because I went off the PC and checked the Pokedex to find that they should have had a Totodile. I went off the Pokedex and went out of the Pokemon Center. I turned my sprite around and talked to the Reaper. The Eevee had a sad face and the text said, "Reaper is struggling to keep up." Struggling to keep up? I went back onto Death's Pokemon and found that Reaper was losing health, but his status was fine. I went back into the Pokemon Center and healed him. I talked to him again. Reaper is looking around. Maybe Reaper losing health but having a fine status was just a glitch. He seemed fine now. I walked out of the Pokemon Center and into Route 30 and played the game as normally. But when I walked into tall grass, I ran into no Pokemon. Maybe Death had used Repel. I passed trainers who should have battled me, but they didn't. I talked to one of them, and they said, "That Eevee is too strong." How would you know if you haven't even battled it? I said to myself. Maybe Death had already battled him. I talked to Reaper, and he had a happy smile on his face. Reaper is enjoying being out with Death. I remembered this Eevee belonged to someone else. I clicked on Death's Pokemon and looked at Reaper's status. His real owner was named Ghost. Another person trying to scare kids? I checked out Reaper's moves. I may as well. We wouldn't be having any battles anytime soon. His moves were Tackle, Bite, and Guillotine. A pretty strong Eevee, I thought. His nature was strong, and he hated losing. I continued the game and soon found myself in the next town. But something was strange about it. The music was the haunted music that you would get in Diamond or Pearl in the haunted house. The town was all grey. There were no buildings, just gravestones, and there was a very thick fog covering it all. Everything was black and white, except Death and Reaper's sprite. The only building was the Pokemon Center, and it was also grey with fog surrounding it. There were no NPCs in this graveyard-like town. I talked to Reaper, and there was an ellipses above his head. Reaper is looking around. He remembers this place. How did it get like this? Reaper's sprite ran up to one of the graves and stared at it. The scene finished and I could move again, but Reaper didn't come back to walk behind me. He was still staring at the gravestone. So I went up to him and talked to him, but his sprite didn't move. Ellipses once again. That was all he said. I couldn't make him follow me again. Well, not now anyways. I decided to look around. I wonder if there's any NPCs in the Pokemon Center. So, that's where I headed. I entered, and everything was all grey, black and white. No music was playing. There wasn't even anyone there. Not even Nurse Joy. However, there was a gap in the desk where someone or something had destroyed it, so I could heal my Pokemon if I wanted to. Since there was no NPCs, I went downstairs. It was normal, but no one was there, and there were more stairs leading down. The stairs were like all the others, all grey, black and white, but there was shadows flowing from it. Seeing as I was the curious type, I went down them. The room that faced me was grey and dull, like everything else in this town. It was as if I was in a cave. It was made of rubble and stone with little boulders scattered around it. It had cave walls, but the whole room was just empty, except from a hole in the wall that led to another mysterious room. I know I should have just went back upstairs and out the Pokemon Center, but my curiosity got the better of me. I walked into the other room. It was just like the other one, but the hole in the wall was in a different place, on the side of the room, not straight forward. I was about to turn left and into the other room, but something stopped me. An Eevee cry called my sprite, and turned around to see Reaper running towards him. Reaper was jumping up and down and the text came up. Reaper got distracted by the gravestone. Reaper should have followed you. Reaper had to warn you. The text then disappeared, and Reaper's sprite slowly walked up to the hole in the wall. This is what Reaper is trying to warn you about. You can't go in. You can't have the same fate as Ghost. Reaper's sprite then turned around and walked back to Death. Reaper then followed me again. Even though I was so curious what may happen if I go through the door-like hole, I took Reaper's word for it and went back through the hole that I'd went through before. Eventually, I got back out of the Pokemon Center. Nothing had changed. Everything was exactly the way it was when I'd first arrived in the ghost town. I checked Reaper's health and it had been cut in two. He must have been attacked. His red eyes were glowing, but very faintly. Maybe this happened when he was losing health. I healed him and went off to explore more of this place with Reaper following my every move. Realizing that I was in Violet City, or was supposed to be, I went north and found a place that Sprout Tower should be. Instead of the old purple roof tower, it was grey and made of stone bricks. There were holes in it where the wall had crumbled, and the door had collapsed from the years there was a gaping hole where it should have been. I turned around and talked to Reaper, in case I wasn't supposed to go in. Reaper is looking at the old castle. He's nodding slowly. Reading this, I thought it'd be alright to go in. So I did. The inside was like a castle, but with only the one room and the stairs leading up to the next. There was still no NPCs around, so I could just climb up the ladder without anyone stopping me. Reaper followed. The next floor was the same as it should be. The same music played, but of course it was all in black and white. The wooden pillar wasn't shaking, but it did have a crack in it. I guess that proved how old it was. and why there was no one inside. The flames on the walls were blood red, the only thing that had colour in this floor except Death and Reaper Sprite. There was a ladder leading down as normal, but the ladder was like the one in the secret floor in the Pokemon Center. It had shadows pouring out of it. Reaper Sprite walked up to it and stared at it for a few seconds before turning around. Reaper doesn't know about this. The same thing could happen like before. You should turn back. Then I had the option to click yes or no. I clicked no. I didn't want to turn back. I wanted to find out what would happen. Reaper Sprite patted back and followed me again. I went down the ladders to find a normal room that you would find in Sprout Tower. The flames on the wall had changed colour. They were now yellow, like they should be. But as I walked down the normal route that you would take, I found a dead end. No ladder, no NPC, no nothing. I knew that the other way would be blocked off too, but I didn't have a choice. I turned back to see if it was blocked off, but Reaper ran out in front of me. His sprite was prepared in a pounce position. Reaper is shaking his head. This is a bad idea. You should get out before it's too late. Like I always do, I ignored it and walked past Reaper's angry sprite. I was honestly surprised that he didn't try and stop me. Then, I found that it wasn't a dead end. There was actually a ladder leading down. So, I took it. When I got down, I found myself in the same kind of room that I'd been in before at the Pokemon Center. The music had stopped playing and the hole that the shadows and darkness flowing out of it stood in front of me. Reaper wasn't with me. So, I went into the hole. The screen then immediately went black and my Nintendo DS turned off. I was pretty mad. It didn't turn back on, so I thought it must just need charging. So, I put it on charge and turned the Nintendo back on again. Nothing changed. It didn't turn on. And it never did again. I never went on it again, and I soon forgot about that Heart Gold copy. The mystery still lies unsolved. What happened to Reaper? And why didn't he stop me from taking the ladder? What fate did Ghost suffer? When I get a new Nintendo, I'll find out. My favourite pastime is reading creepypastas. Ironic, isn't it? Oh well, now part of my life is just one story among the rest. My best friend told me that he works for Nintendo. I just laughed and said, yeah right. He glared back at me claiming he'd send me evidence. I just rolled my eyes with a shrug, but I'd be proven wrong. When I got home, I was alone, but I didn't really care. My phone buzzed indicating that I'd gotten a text. Hey, check your email. I sighed. It was my friend. I'm pretty sure it was still a prank, but I obliged. I opened my account, seeing an email from him. I clicked on it. I know you don't believe me, but please, just check out these photos. I scrolled down and gasped. There were 10 pictures, all from a Pokemon game. Each showed its subject clearly. The first thing I noted was that the region was Hoenn. Now you may think it was Omega Ruby or Alpha Sapphire, but these graphics were so much better than the others. I took out my phone to see that I had a text. Cool, right? This time I responded. Awesome. Hey, what game is this? Delta Emerald. I freaked. Emerald was my favorite game, and he knew it. I immediately wanted it. Picking up my phone again, I started to type the request, but he beat me to it. I mailed you a copy a few days earlier, for free, before it's even announced. Thank you. Thank you so much. Then I realized that I'd forgotten to check the mail. Inside, there was just one package. Pokemon Delta Emerald. I snatched out the mailbox and raced upstairs. I lifted my 3DS XL from its case and gently inserted the new cartridge. I turned on the DS and pushed the A button. Rayquaza roared and the game began. Selecting new game, I went through the setup and started my adventure. Delta Emerald was the hardest Pokemon game I've ever played. Even with my winter break, I still spent a good amount of time playing each day for a week. Finally though, I beat Steven. I was so excited, because I knew I was at the best part. Delta episode. I nearly screeched with joy. My favourite part. It all began as normal, which was a little bit disappointing, but I knew it would end up being different. When I finally reached Sky Tower, I was exhausted. I saved in front of Rayquaza and went to bed. When I woke up, I was so excited. I immediately opened the game and interacted with the dragon. The fight began. And I was surprised to see that my Pokemon were different. But instead of the cliche freaking out, I was ecstatic. Special Pokemon for a special boss. Rayquaza was tough. He took out my 5 Pokemon and I was sure I would lost. That is, until I saw my last Pokemon. Oh my Arceus, yes. I sent out the literal god Pokemon. Thinking that I had this win in the bag, I selected Judgment and Arceus is frozen with fear. What? This is cool. Game Freak really went all out on this one. Rayquaza used Life Drain. Now, I was getting a bit worried. Arceus was losing health. Fast. Arceus has fainted. Then the words glitched and it read, Arceus has died. Rayquaza leveled up to level 100. This is getting even weirder. Rayquaza is evolving. Rayquaza has evolved into Kuryu. That was when I finally freaked. Rayquaza was distorted and grotesque. It had the basic shape of its Mega, but it was black, like it was shiny. The corners of its mouth were twisted, forming a cross between a demonic smile and a lonely pout. The pincers were just stained red, just like its empty eye sockets. Kuryu had longer claws and its body was twisted as well. Worse than its appearance was its cry. The first part was the distorted scream of Arceus, followed by a demonic remix of Rayquaza's cry, and then it ended with static. A text box popped up. I'm lonely. Stay with me? Despite his plea, I made the worst mistake you could make in these situations. I just turned it off. Again, I made a terrible mistake. I turned the game back on, hoping that this was a one-time occurrence. It wasn't. The game started with terrible static. Why? Don't you like me? I thought you would stay. The static quieted. So, you made your choice. I haven't made mine. I will always stay with you. I took out the cartridge and threw it out the window. I can only hope that that was enough. My screen flickered on. I screamed because Kuryu was staring right at me. I will always stay with you. There is no other option. I mashed the power button so hard, I almost broke it. Perhaps I valued my DS too much, but I refused to get rid of it. With a vow never to play it again, I went down to the garden and retrieved my game. Removing the hacked data on my DS wasn't very hard. My friend didn't hide his coding very well. Either way, I'll never trust him again. And next time I encounter a Rayquaza, I'm not taking any chances. 9-year-old Elise Willow had always had a fascination with the past. While Shriton City's other children stared at their televisions, she pressed her face to the glass around exhibits in the Nacreme Museum. Of course, this required convincing Rusty, her parent Stoutland, to accompany her to the neighbouring town, which was not an easy task, but it was worth it. While the other children ran and roughhoused, she inspected the debris in the dream yard, painstakingly sketching particularly interesting places. She thought that the washed out old hunks of concrete looked lonely somehow, and so she felt a sense of duty to keep them company and unravel their secrets. However, hundreds of people had already explored every nook and cranny of the dream yard. She often saw trainers battling there, their Pokemon darting through the myriad holes in the ruins. She had higher ambitions. This stemmed from her frequent visits to the museum. The museum's curator had picked up on the pattern of an unaccompanied little girl to show up like clockwork every day at precisely 4 p.m. When she asked the child where her parents were, she discovered a passion for archaeology, and the two quickly became friends. Elise rather liked Lenora. Not only was she apparently an infinite fountain of knowledge about everything Elise had ever wanted to know, she was a gym leader. It was from Lenora that Elisa learned of the abyssal ruins, buried beneath the sparkling waters of Undella Bay. They were built by a mysterious ancient civilization. Nobody knew why. They were incredibly difficult to investigate, as powerful torrents of water would sweep through the ruins just as something new would be found. Many esteemed archaeologists suspected that some sort of booby trap caused this. A strange, never-before-seen script covered the walls, and it was just starting to be deciphered. It was an anomalous place, rife with mystery. A perfect place to captivate Elise's dreams. From the first day she heard about it, Elise read obsessively about the ruins, often foregoing basic comforts such as food or sleep. Her grades in school began to falter, as she preferred to read research papers rather than complete her homework. Her normally sharp mind became muddled from fatigue, despite the writers of the papers having vocabularies many times the size of Elise's. She became something of an expert on the abyssal ruins, even memorizing the script found on the walls. Anticipation for her 10th birthday seized her like it never had before, because when she was 10, she could get a Pokemon. When she had a Pokemon, she would be free to travel. When that day rolled around, a skinny, serious-faced girl walked into Professor Juniper's lab. Elise had dressed her very best for the occasion, but made no effort to hide the dark circles under her eyes. After receiving the usual spiel given to new trainers, she wordlessly made her way to the table and picked up the Pokeball containing Oshawott, for it would be able to dive underwater and take her to the ruins that were the focus of her life. She called it Argus, for no reason in particular. It would be a fateful partnership. It was 2 years later when Elise finally set foot on the fine sands of Undella Town. Many factors had conspired against her ever reaching it, as if trying to warn her away from her goal in any way possible. Marvelous Bridge had been shut down for repairs. The sandstorm of the century prevented the timely crossing of Route 4, forcing Elise to stay in Castelia Sea for many weeks. Twist Mountain had experienced a problematic landslide, and the rubble had to be moved away from the path before Elise could even enter the cave. And of course, she was distracted for some time by the relic castle, with its golden sands flowing across stone, and the mysterious dragon spiral tower stretching off into the sky. Argus, now a Samurott, bent down to allow his train to climb on his back. The warm waters of Undella Bay welcomed him as he slid into the water, Elise riding. She craned her neck, searching for the dark spots in the water, signaling an area in which the seafloor dropped suddenly, where the entrances to the abyssal ruins could be found. Elise murmured into Argus's ear and pointed in the distance. The Pokemon sped in the direction specified. As Elise lowered her scuba mask, taking a deep breath, Argus submerged them. The light filtering through the water became dimmer and dimmer as Argus fought the upward current. A pyramidical structure loomed ahead of the pair, intricate runes carved into the sides. Elise could not read them, as they were far away, and they had faded with time and endless pounding of the waves. Argus was beginning to feel agitated, as he knew, just knew, that something about this place was horribly wrong. Something directly against the natural order he'd known all his life. He sensed a presence, one that he felt had no right to exist. The other Pokemon in the area must have felt it too, as not a single fin or tail could be seen. But Argus pressed on, where it would make his trainer, his friend, happy. A rectangular hole near the base of the pyramid yawned open, like a dark, gaping maw ready to swallow trespassers. Elise headed straight for it. She lingered in the water and darkness for a moment, to allow her eyes to adapt. A click echoed in the distance, signalling the setting of the torrent trap, but it sounded weak and ineffectual, as if someone had jammed the mechanism. She didn't mind, as this would allow her more time to explore, maybe even reach new depths no one had seen before. Beaming with excitement, she swam forwards to a stone panel in the wall, the ancient script she knew so well covering it. Impossibly, the writing was perfectly pristine, as if it had just been carved yesterday. Elise trailed her fingers across the wall she had read. To her surprise, there was no message about a king, as most of the text in the ruins purportedly contained. Instead, it read 2 words: "Please help." This was simply not possible. The first floor of the abyssal ruins had been explored thoroughly, and nobody found those 2 words. So simple, yet so deeply, viscerally unsettling. Elise glared warily at the panel, then waved to Argus, telling him to follow. Odd text aside, it was time to move on. Elise scanned the hallways, hoping to find perhaps an ancient artifact someone had missed, or better, another stone panel set in the wall. She found the latter. This one was clearly carved as well. Clear, just as it was thousands of years ago. Elise squinted at the wall. Again, 2 words: "I am trapped." Who had done this? Elise had come to a sickening conclusion that some dedicated vandal had desecrated the site in order to play some tasteless joke. This was unforgivable. For 3 years now, she had poured her soul into this place. And now, it was simply not as glorious as it once was, as it should have been. She growled a curse, then turned to the left, heading for another panel. She could have sworn that she saw the indents flicker momentarily as she swam, but this was likely due to the mass of water blurring her already murky vision. These carvings were fresh as well. "Wrong way," they read. These messages were trying to lead Elise along, like a lab rat in a maze. She was unafraid of what they might lead to. She was too blinded by a broiling rage to consider the possible danger. She turned, kicking off the wall, and paddled in the other direction. Argus followed obediently, though the wrongness he felt was growing stronger. He felt it pressing down around him, stronger than the water pressure, trying to suffocate them both. The Samurai couldn't deny it. He was afraid. Elise swam forward, guided by the directions of the panels. No, desperate pleas to come closer. It was almost as if someone or something was using them to bring her to their or its lair. Finally, she hit a dead end. A small mist of bubbles sprayed through the tiniest of cracks in the left side of the wall. More script was engraved in it. It was an entirely new message, unlike any that she'd seen up to this point. "I'm lonely." Just as Elise finished reading, a low-pitched, ominous rumble roared from directly in front of her. The stone slab slid aside, groaning and grumbling as it bumped over the uneven floor. She paid no notice to Argus's whimper as the samurai sensed the uncomfortable presence more strongly. Nobody, not even the most brilliant minds in archaeology, had even expected such a thing to occur. Elise Willow would be the first person to pass this wall in over 3,000 years. The very thought had her shivering with excitement, though she didn't realize that the smile on her face was a broken parody of the intended expression. Argus huddled close to his trainer as they rose to the second floor of the pyramid. The light levels were lower than the floor below, and the wall had something of like a mirage-like quality due to the water refracting what little light remained. Elise threw an arm around her nervous Pokemon, though she wasn't devoting her full attention to Argus. She had spotted another panel in the wall, with the symbols of the ruined script on it. A message for her, and her alone. She was thoroughly convinced of this, that the whole experience was hers and hers alone, and that no one else could have it. No one could take it from her. She eagerly translated this new phrase. I want a... Puzzled by the abrupt ending of the text, Elise cast her gaze about, hoping to perhaps find the end of the sentence on another tablet. There was a junction up ahead, where it had the options of turning left or right. She faltered momentarily at the point where the decision had to be made, though she felt an impulse to turn right. The sensation was similar to what is usually called a gut feeling, though stronger, as well as not being entirely internal, though she did find this slightly eerie. Turn right she did, spurred on by her curiosity. And as she had hoped, the end of the sentence was carved here, though the runes were not as definitive as they had been before, as if written by an uncertain hand. It was a single word. Friend. Elise pressed her hand to the stone, wishing comfort to the writer of the message. It couldn't possibly be a vandal at this point. Even the full-fledged archaeologists hadn't been able to get this far. She had to deduce what was going on, and who was calling for help, unable to escape from a ruin on the sea floor. In that moment, nothing mattered more. She drifted along the path, marked by the now familiar wall panels, sparing little more than a glance to each as she passed. The bluish light rippling through the labyrinth gave the place a dreamlike, hallucinatory quality, which would be enough to set many people on edge. Elise, however, was not one of these people, because she was no longer in full control of her wishes and fears. After several minutes, she had reached another dead end. Before she could even begin to decipher the text on this wall, the slab began to grind aside, quickly and jerkily, as if someone was hastily pushing it open. Though upset about being unable to read the text, this was outweighed by her desire, no, her need to press on. A rectangular gap in the ceiling seemed to welcome her, and she swam upwards to meet it. They were getting closer, being inexorably drawn towards the presence. Not physically, no. But Argus had never seen Elise quite like this. Her expression was predatory, and while she did devote nearly all of her waking hours to the study of these Arceus-forsaken abyssal ruins, her obsession had never grown to this level, to the point where nothing else mattered in the slightest, not even him. Argus whined and prodded her gently with his horn, but her only response was a hiss of displeasure. The samurai understood what this meant, that his trainer had changed. She had trusted his instincts in the past. Something was very, very wrong, and Argus had the impression that they might not be leaving. It is in fact possible for a human to experience negative physical symptoms of joy. Not the joy of a child receiving a new toy, or the joy of a scientist who has discovered something new, but the joy of a madman who has achieved the dangerous, impossible dream that has taken hold of his life for years. Elise shook uncontrollably, though this did not impede her progress to the end of the hallway. Her eyes were bloodshot and watering, and she refused to blink and miss a fraction of a second of vision. Every fibre of her being was supersaturated with a mania that threatened to burst out at any second. Her gaze was fixated on the wall, as intense and focused as that of a tiger stalking its prey. When she reached it, Elise slammed her palms into the wall, bending her elbows so her face, with its manic smile, could be closer to the wall, to the sweet glyphs that captivated her mind. Her heart rate increased, and her breathing was quick and laboured. Argus watched in horror as the gauge indicating her oxygen supply steadily began to drop at a faster rate than before. This message was longer than most of the others. This development was so exciting, at least for Elise, who licked her lips as if about to dig into a large meal. "Please, come keep me company." The next tablets all contained phrases of similar length. "We'll be best friends. I just know it. Come on, I want to play. We can be inseparable. Forever and ever and ever." Until finally, "One more step." Elise finished reading this, a manic laugh bubbling up from her lungs. It increased in pitch and volume as the slab ground against the floor, screeching like nails on a chalkboard, until her entire body racked painfully with each heave of her chest. Argus howled, suddenly experiencing a splitting headache. The presence was now overwhelming, and his stomach churned, trying to regurgitate his last meal. He then became aware of the presence of a pair of hands on the sides of his snout. They were Elise's. He whimpered, returning to a regular stance, to convey that he didn't like the situation, but he would still follow. Elise turned back around, shooting a glare over her shoulder. She ascended to the fourth and final floor. Surprisingly, the top floor was filled with air rather than water. Elise removed her mask as it was beginning to itch. The air tasted saline and stale, as if it had been stagnant for a long time. Argus's head broke the surface beside her as she clambered onto the stone floor. The hallway turned once more. Around the corner lay destiny. For the first time since entering the ruins, the hallway opened up into a large room. As Elise entered, a clarity of mind she hadn't realized she was missing returned to her. She shuddered, horrified that altering her psyche could be so easy that she didn't even notice it happen. A single candle suddenly flared to life at the opposite wall, illuminating a peculiar scene. A raven-haired young man lay sprawled on the floor. He wore a fur-trimmed robe, once a stately crimson garment, though now it was tattered and faded to a hue between those of rust and dried blood. The few visible patches of skin were white as bone, drained of all colour, and probably blood as well. Elise could only come to the conclusion that he had been dead for a long time. A purloin stood sentinel over the corpse, eyeing her warily. It bent down to nuzzle the man's cheek, seeking attention. Poor thing. It must not have understood that its human would never be able to wake up and return its affection. But his hand slowly clenched into a loose fist. He began to push himself up, movements jerky and unstable, reminiscent of a marionette in the hands of an unskilled puppeteer. He eventually managed to stand, facing away from Elise, who was rooted to the spot in shock, fully aware of the incessant pounding of her heart. Argus leaned protectively over her shoulder, growling softly. This was what he had sensed earlier. He was sure, and while he feared for his own life, he could not allow harm to befall his dearest friend, or at least make a pretense to if the proceedings were beyond his control. The thing turned, feet losing some of their shakiness, revealing a grin. A horrible, psychopathic grin, far wider than the muscles of the human face could possibly stretch to accommodate. Elise was visibly shaking, senses blurring from force of sheer terror as the man stumbled closer, step by menacing step. He paused as he reached Elise. His eyes softened as he reached out a frigid hand and placed it on her cheek. It slid off after a long moment, which seemed to snap Elise out of her fearful trance. She whirled around and took off running, only to be greeted by a wall she was positive hadn't been there before. There were 2 sentences carved into it. "I don't want you to go. Stay here with me." Elise held back a sob, pounding the wall in futile frustration. She had but one option remaining, which was to take the creature up on his offer. Reluctantly, she reoriented herself to face him. Above the mouth, which would not move, his expression was pleading, like a child who wanted his friend to stay just a minute longer. As Elise walked forward, he extended a quivering hand. Without ever knowing why, she took it in hers, and the bones and muscles in her face rearranged themselves, forming a grin to mirror his, which marked her newfound importance. The abyssal ruins had acquired a new queen. I'll never look at a shiny Eevee in the same way again. Ever. It started only a few days ago. I was on the internet looking for action replay codes. I really wanted one for either a shiny Vulpix or a shiny Eevee. Then, I found one for that shiny Eevee that I wanted so much. The code was long, but I was willing to take the time to put it in. It took about 15 minutes to put the code in, but I was excited to get the code into action. I started my Soul Silver game up with the code on. I clicked continue, and my previous save data came up. I was saved right in front of the Pokemon Center. I rushed into the place with my Typhlosion following behind me. I went to the PC and pressed A. Klaus booted up the PC. I clicked A on Bill's PC. Pokemon storage system activated. I pressed the L and R buttons down and moved to box 5, where a shiny Eevee was supposed to come up. I moved the cursor over the Eevee, and it was named EE, and it was a level 1. Its moves were Tackle, Growl, Sand Attack, and Swift. I took out my level 1 Giratina from my party, and put it into the first box of the PC. Afterwards, I put EE in my party. I wanted to trade it into my Heart Gold version, since it was the one that I always play. I got my other DS and popped Heart Gold into it. I turned it on and clicked continue. Once both my players were in the Union Room, I started the trade. I traded a Cubone onto my Soul Silver in return for EE. Once the Pokemon were traded onto the separate versions, I made both players leave the Union Room and saved, one at a time. Once turning off the system, Soul Silver was in. I went to play Heart Gold. I wanted to clone EE so I could get the rest of the evolutions. I wonder if I have a Thunderstone, I wondered to myself as I opened my character's bag. The only evolution stone I had was a Water Stone. Vaporeon will do for now, I guess. I clicked A on the Water Stone and clicked on EE. I watched as the Eevee evolved into a pink Vaporeon. Once the evolution process was done, I saved the game and turned it off, as it was time for me to go to bed. Several days had passed, and I'd gotten all of the shiny evolutions except for Flareon, but that didn't really matter to me. I'd get it later. I wanted to get EE back onto my Soul Silver. I got my DS and popped in my Action Replay DSi along with Soul Silver. Once the code list loaded, I clicked on the shiny Eevee code and started up the game. I clicked continue as soon as the options came up. I was saved inside the Pokemon Center this time. I ran over to the PC. Klaus booted up the PC. I clicked A on Bill's PC. Pokemon storage system activated. I was already in box 5, so I moved to box 6 and held down the R and L buttons. I moved back to box 5, but instead of an Eevee icon in the box, there was an egg icon. I moved my cursor onto it. It was a bad egg. I moved the egg to the side of the box and tried again. Another bad egg. I moved the egg to the bottom and tried for a third time. This time, EE appeared in the box. I moved EE back to my party, as I wanted to train him. I completely disregarded the fact that I had 2 bad eggs in my PC box now, and logged off the PC. I ran out of the Pokemon Center to train EE. I had the max XP code on, so this would be pretty easy. After flying to Goldenrod City on my Ho-Oh, I ran out of the city knowing that I'd sneak past some of the trainers. Once a trainer had spotted me, I sent out EE. The opposing trainer sent out a level 10 Diglett. I return EE and send out my trusty Typhlosion. After the foe's Diglett attacked, I selected Typhlosion's command. This wouldn't be hard at all for him, seeing as he was level 100. I selected Slash. Typhlosion used Slash. Foe Diglett fainted. I held down the R button so E would gain max experience points. E grew to level 2. E grew to level 3. This went on until E grew to level 37. Trainer is about to send Zubat. Will Klaus change Pokemon? I selected yes and sent out EE. Go, EE! Trainer sent out Zubat. I selected the fight command, then chose Swift. EE used Swift. Foe Zubat died. The Zubat died? I questioned. I shook my head and ignored it, although through my confusion, I had forgotten to hold down the R button to get max XP for Eevee. Trainer is about to send out Diglett. Will Klaus switch Pokemon? I selected no this time. Trainer sent out Diglett. What will EE do? I selected the fight option, then chose Swift again. EE used Swift. Foe's Diglett died. Again, the Pokemon had died. Even though this still confused me, I remembered to hold down the R button this time. EE grew to level 38. EE grew to level 39. EE grew to level 40. This again continued until EE reached level 52. The opposing trainer didn't do anything after I beat him. Before the screen went back to the overworld, I got the evolution screen, and EE was on there. What? EE is evolving. The animation started, showing it was trying to evolve into an Espeon. I clicked the B button, since I already had a shiny Espeon. What? EE stopped evolving. I noticed that EE seemed to be angry. I decided to ignore this and carry on training. After about 5 minutes or so, EE was ready to evolve again. I pressed the B button again, and EE seemed even angrier at me. I was once again in the overworld, but before I could do anything, my trainer faced EE and an angry icon appeared above its head. EE wants to evolve into an Espeon. Yes or no options came up. Being that I didn't want it to evolve into an Espeon, I clicked no. The angry icon appeared over EE's head again, and the small sprite jumped up and down as if it were throwing a tantrum. EE wants to evolve. Another yes or no option came up. I clicked no again. EE didn't do anything this time. I opened up my party and noticed that all my Pokemon were now bad eggs, except for EE. I then clicked on EE and then summary. EE's sprite had an evil looking smirk on its face, along with red eyes. I was starting to get tired of it. I went to a Pokemon Center and went to the PC. Klaus booted up the PC. I clicked A on Bill's PC. Pokemon storage system activated. I selected EE and clicked on release. EE won't leave without a fight. Suddenly, I'm dragged into a random encounter. EE wants to fight. Go, Typhlosion! There were two things that I noticed here. The first was that I suddenly had my Typhlosion back. The second was that both EE and Typhlosion sprites were bloody. EE still had that grin on its face, and there was blood on its eyes and ears. Typhlosion's sprite looked very much like it was in pain. Blood was dripping from its mouth and nose. Flesh was exposed on its forehead, and the flame on its neck looked weak. What will Typhlosion do? I clicked the fight command and then chose Flamethrower. Typhlosion is scared. What? I whispered to myself. I didn't know Pokemon would get scared to attack. EE used Bite. The attack dealt much damage to my Typhlosion, but it wasn't down yet. There was more blood on it now than before though. What will Typhlosion do? Fight. Flamethrower. Typhlosion is scared. I sighed. Again? EE used Kill. Typhlosion has died. No! I yelled. I'm just glad my dad wasn't home when I yelled like that. Klaus is out of usable Pokemon. Klaus fell victim to EE. I was once again confused. What did it mean, fell victim? I was back in the overworld, but I was in what seemed to be Ilex Forest instead of the Pokemon Center. The forest was a dark red instead of its normal green color. Bones and rotting flesh were strewn across the area. The little pond was blood red too. At this point, I was starting to feel sick to my stomach. Then I noticed something. Was right in front of my trainer. Sprite jumped up and down. Wants you to suffer. I was getting too scared to go on with this. I moved my thumb towards the power button. Don't even try it. You're not getting away from me. A voice came through the speakers of my DS. I assumed the voice belonged to EE. The screen turned to black, and the only sound I could hear was what sounded like slashing. When the overworld came back, I saw my trainer laying on the ground in a pool of blood. He had an arm and a leg missing, and his eyes were pitch black. I had assumed that his eyes were ripped out. Sprite jumped up and down again, then a happy icon appeared over E's head. I tried turning off the game again, and to my surprise, it finally worked. I sat on my couch speechless, and breathing hard for a moment before turning it back on. I clicked back on Soul Silver once I was on the DSi menu. After the title screen came up, I was immediately taken to a wild encounter. My trainer Sprite was missing his eyes and an arm. I swallowed hard. This greatly disturbed me. Then the opposing Pokemon had appeared. Attacked. I noticed that had shiny Espeon ears, tail, and a jaw. Blood was dripping from all of them, and it also had blood coming from its eyes. Its cry was like a demonic version of Espeon's cry. The only option was Ball. I click on it. Klaus used one Pokeball. Goes into the ball. It shakes once, and again. Then breaks out. Doesn't want to go back. Used Kill. Oh no, I said quietly to myself. There was a flash of crimson red before a text box came up. Has killed Klaus. The screen went back to the overworld. My trainer Sprite wasn't there. Sprite was now grinning widely. You should have let me evolve. E's voice echoed through the speakers of my DSi. The game turned itself off as finished talking. I was too terrified to turn it back on. I threw my DS at the wall and, surprisingly, only my Soul Silver game pops out of it. I picked up the game cartridge and threw it in the trash can in the corner of my room. I sat there on my couch wondering what just happened. I turned on my TV and the screen was black. I figured I just left it on the channel I used to play on my Wii. I turned through the channels before leaving it on 29. The screen remained black. I sighed and reached to press the power button, but before I could, an eerie voice comes through the speakers. You should have let me evolve. I should have just accepted her for who she was. I was having fun playing my Soul Silver. I was walking around in the grass looking for a shiny Eevee. I needed one. I must have one to get a shiny Jolteon. I entered one patch of grass, and I was amazed at what I saw. It was a wild Jolteon. Wait, is that the animation for shinies? It's a shiny Jolteon. I found a shiny Jolteon. I had to catch it. My Ninetales was sent out. I commanded it to use Will-O-Wisp. It did a good amount of damage on the Jolteon, but kept it from fainting. The Jolteon attacked with Thundershock, and my Ninetales almost fainted. I threw an Ultra Ball. 1 shake. 2. 3. Click. I got it. I got a shiny Jolteon. But I didn't want it to be called Jolteon. I wanted to nickname her. So I chose a nickname for her. I said yes to giving her a nickname, and the screen came up. Light. She was now named Light. I was so happy to finally have one. I went to my Pokemon party as I had one spot open for a Pokemon, and selected Light. I clicked on her summary. She was a good, strong Pokemon. Her stats and HP were good as well. Until I noticed she had stitches connecting her paw to her left leg. Was this a glitch or something? Wait, why is she looking at me like that? She had the look as if she was about to cry. I had to accept her. I smiled and said to her, "Don't worry, stitches or no stitches, you're my Jolteon Light. I love you." Her look seemed to change. It was more hopeful. I was happy that I was able to cheer her up. Soon the day came that I had to let Light go. She was disrupting my team, and I couldn't take it anymore. She'd randomly pop into battles without warning, hit my Pokemon, and so on. I didn't care that she was special. This was driving me nuts. I put her in my PC box and selected release. Then, the screen went all black, but Light's sprite remained. It started to cry, and the stitches connecting her paw to her leg were starting to bleed. Then, a text box appeared. It read, "Do you really want to release me, Master? I thought you loved me for who I was." A yes/no option appeared. As sad as I was to do it, I selected yes. Light became enraged. Another text box appeared. "Ugh, you're just like all the others. All the other games I hacked myself into before you. They all did this. Well, no more. You are not getting rid of me." I was horrified. This Pokemon hacked itself into games? I shivered, and I was hoping that she wouldn't do too much. A text box appeared. "I shall defeat you before I go. I will make you feel my pain." A battle started. An ashamed Light appeared. A text box read as Light came on the screen as my opponent. Her cry was creepy and distorted. For some reason, my only Pokemon was Ninetales, but I didn't complain. She was sent out, and the battle began. I commanded Ninetales to use Will-O-Wisp, but I was horrified when a text box appeared. Ninetales is too terrified to attack. Then it was Light's move. She used a move called Unacceptance. I was freaking out. I knew that that wasn't good. As soon as it hit Ninetales, it killed her. Killed. "Your precious Ninetales has been killed. What do you think of me now?" Light Sprite grinned and then laughed. Then suddenly, Light stopped. A text box appeared. "No. I can't do this. I can't do this to you." Light fell to the ground. Her paw was bleeding out. "Master, I want to come back to you. I'll be better. I'll care." Opponent Light has died. The game immediately shut off. I was silent, just sitting there with my DSi still in my cold, shivering hands. I closed the DSi and set it on my desk and sighed. It was over. I then looked over at my bed, and a single tear fell from my eye as I beheld what was on my bed. It was a premium Jolteon plush, and it had stitches connecting its paw to its leg. I've been running as long as I can remember, from the deepest caves of the Seafoam Islands to the darkest pits of the Rock Tunnel. It has pursued me. No matter what I do, I see it everywhere. Sometimes, it'll just appear outside of my range of vision. You know the spot I'm talking about. It's that place that exists somewhere just beyond the corner of your eye, where everything blurs when you try to look there. You'd think by now that someone as strong as me wouldn't have to worry about such trivial things. Being chased by a Pokemon. For a so-called Pokemon League champion? It's pretty pathetic when you think about it. The thing is though, I don't even know if this thing is a Pokemon at all. I've got as many type advantages lined up as I can imagine needing, save for a ghost type. After my sole experience in one place in the world that still haunts my dreams, let's just say that I never want to see another ghost Pokemon for as long as I live. The fact remains though, I'm out of places to run now. If the world's strongest wild Pokemon can't provide a barrier against this thing, then I guess I'm out of luck. There's one really stupid part of this whole situation though, and that's what gets me. It's the fact that, even with all my accomplishments, I wasn't strong enough to win this time. Since day one of my journey, I've been powerful. I overcame Blue Squirtle like it was nothing. I powered my way through Viridian Forest as a newbie trainer, dodging poisonous Beedrill, the paralyzing power of Butterfree, and the deadly high voltage attacks of the Pikachu that lived there. I pounded Brock and his rock types into the dust with one of my very first Pokemon, a male Nidoran that by fortune's fate had learned double kick attack just as we exit the forest. I sank Misty's water types with a Bulbasaur that was kindly given to me to look after by a trainer outside Cerulean. I bested Lieutenant Surge and his live wire of a war-born Raichu. When it came down to the line, a Diglett was all that stood between me and certain defeat there. Sabrina and her psychic types gave me a run for my money, but she too fell against the power of the bond of my Pokemon. Like breaking waves crashing uselessly against a rocky seashore. Even when I made it to Giovanni, the rotten bastard that headed up Team Rocket in secret, using his gym as a financial conduit to partially fund the criminal syndicate, I tore through his ground types as though I was a tornado unleashed. By this point, my Pokemon and I were nigh inseparable, nigh unstoppable. We knew what the other was thinking, without me even having to give commands. Then came the day that we began to compete in the Pokemon League. Such tough opponents were met, and they were all worthy foes. I had to admit, I was beginning to sweat in the final rounds against Lance and his Dragonite, yet even they were no match for me. Once I had bested Blue for the final time, and taken my rightful place at the top of the mountain, I knew. There was not a force in heaven or earth that could touch my Pokemon or I. Or so I thought. With my final adventure into Cerulean Cave to capture the renegade Pokemon Mewtwo, I hadn't thought that there was any challenge left to be had in the Kanto region. So when I travelled to Johto and wiped them clean of their gym badges, I found myself wanting to test my limits more and more. That's when I heard of it. Rumours of a Pokemon so powerful that could bend the fabrics of reality itself. I had bested many tough opponents. I had captured Pokemon so rare that they were thought to be mere legends. This, however, this would be my ultimate challenge. With Pokeballs in hand and my team by my side, we went searching for the mystery Pokemon. For months, we scoured the countryside, carefully picking apart any clues or traces of the creature. For every hint we received though, only more mystery followed. The strangest thing about all of the information we gathered was that it all seemed to be second-hand. Any of the people I talked to mentioned a friend of a friend who had gone looking for it. Sometimes they found what they were looking for. Sometimes, however, well, let's just say that the details are as varied as opinions on the Pokemon were. I heard it was 80 feet tall. Man, I'd love to go after this thing myself. My friend said her brother described it as shimmering. He disappeared shortly afterwards though. Yeah, I've heard of it. Supposedly it only appears to the strongest trainers in the world. I wouldn't go near it. Last I heard, the guy who went after it never came back. Rumour has it that it can change shapes. Pokemon are gentle creatures by nature, but this thing? It's a killer. If you want to keep breathing, don't go looking for it. Most of them had the same ring to them. The Pokemon in question was dangerous. On top of that, supposedly none of the trainers who went after it were ever seen again. While I admit it was beginning to worry me, the challenge was that much more tempting. So, when I finally got a solid lead, you can bet that I dropped everything I was doing and followed it up. We'd been travelling south from Pallet Town for about 2 days by sea. My Lapras had always been a strong swimmer, much faster than Blastoise. Together, we rowed confidently towards the far southern volcanic belt where I'd once faced off against Blaine for the Volcano badge. I gave her a soft rub down along her neck every now and then, just to show my thanks for her work. She always replied in kind by trying to push the pace faster, even if I'd told her over and over that there was no hurry. We finally had something to look into, with a solid backstory now. There'd be plenty of time to follow it up. Over the last 2 weeks of information gathering, some of the clues had begun to point to a very specific beach on Cinnabar Island, along with newsreels and newspaper clippings reporting missing people in the area. 1 or 2 of my leads had directed me there by way of similar stories about trainers on vacations. Trainers who, like the rest, hadn't come home. There was one final piece of information, however, that absolutely captivated my attention. Now, you have to remember that Cinnabar Island was known for its volcanic activity. Based on this assumption, one can further assume that there are a lot of open pits to fall into, given the island's semi-mountainous nature. While that could have explained a few of the disappearances, there was one in particular that was marked by such an oddity that it couldn't so easily be explained away. According to the eyewitness reports, just after a trainer had set off running full tilt up the shoreline to go after an unnamed Pokemon, the sky over the beach was ripped apart by a shimmering glow that expanded outward like a shockwave. When police had arrived on the scene, all they had found was the trainer's beach shorts and 2 very badly damaged Pokeballs. The Pokeballs themselves looked like they had been cross-sectioned away, almost as though someone had taken a die punch and chipped perfectly square pieces out of them intently. By the time Lapras and I had finally made landfall on the northern shore of the sprawling island, you could say I was practically chomping at the bit to take my crack at capturing this Pokemon. Anyone with any common sense might think I was crazy, but that is where I'd say that anyone who wouldn't take this chance was crazy. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Not like I hadn't had plenty of those already. So, after we checked in at the Pokemon Center and took a short half-day break, we circled the island and came down on the eastern shore. Lapras and I began a search pattern immediately. Up and down the coastline we scoured for any traces of the mysterious Pokemon. 3 days we spent, following the same continuous pattern. By day we searched, by night I curled up next to my beloved water Pokemon on the sandy beach, and together we drifted off to sleep in each other's warm, though sometimes often very damp, comfort. On the 4th day, I was about to give up hope. We'd just done a 23rd consecutive trip up the shoreline when a cry from the beach rang out and caught my attention. Turning my head swiftly to investigate the source, I saw a group of 3 beachgoers running in panic down the shore, obviously desperate to get away from something. With a quick pat to her shell, Lapras and I spun on the spot and made a Beedrill line for the beach. No sooner had we landed, did the sand beneath us begin to quake fiercely. Casting my sight to where the people had been fleeing from, I waited in hesitant anticipation as I stood upon Lapras' shell. The trees near the shore began to tremble. I crouched down, ready to possibly face the mystery Pokemon I'd been searching for. My mouth watered intensely. Every muscle in my body was prepared for this moment. At that moment, in the glistening bright sunshine of the seaside of the island paradise, a Rhydon came bursting from the foliage. I sat there stunned in awe for a moment, not believing my luck. Of all the Pokemon in the world I could have faced, legendary or not, all of that commotion came because of a Rhydon? While not particularly common species to the island, neglectful trainers were often known for abandoning their Pokemon when they were no longer wanted. It wasn't exactly out of the ordinary, but it also wasn't what I'd been hoping for. I sighed heavily, my heart sinking. This wouldn't be any challenge at all. If anything, I'd be doing a public service. I'd already caught and evolved a Rhyhorn, but I couldn't very well leave a rampaging Pokemon in such a highly trafficked tourist location. Buckling down with a quick mutter, I gave Lapras a signal as I hopped off her shell. She squealed once more in acknowledgement, before firing off a high-powered water gun. Without even looking, as I turned away in disgust at the situation, I knew the water gun had hit its target. My girl didn't miss. Ever. So, one can imagine my surprise when I still felt the incoming pounding of the rock type. That caught my attention. I spun around in the sand once more to face the charging Pokemon. Though thoroughly soaked from head to toe, it didn't seem phased in the least. Perhaps this one might be worth adding to the collection after all, instead of turning it over to the Pokemon Center. If only so the professor could study its seeming immunity to water. I snapped my hat around to sit backwards, putting on my game face. If this Pokemon wanted a battle, I sure wouldn't disappoint. Alright girl, full force Ice Beam, hit it! I didn't need to say anything, but it still felt all that much more satisfying to see the beam of glacial energy racing across the scorching sand our opponent at my command. What came next? I could never have predicted. The Rhydon literally split into pieces as the Ice Beam connected, flying apart into 5 sections before coalescing once again into a whole Pokemon. As it did, it gave away the telltale sign that I'd been looking for. There had been a brief but brilliant flash of something ethereal in its body. Despite it having taken the form of a Rhydon, I had found my mystery Pokemon. Now it was time to get intense. Pokédex in one hand, Pokeball in the other. I flipped open Dexter and aimed it true. No Pokemon data found. I stared down at the red device in my hand, dumbstruck by what the electronic voice had said. Of all the 250 some Pokemon I've encountered, not one of them registered. I hit the refresh button a couple of times just to make sure Dex hadn't glitched. No Pokemon data found, it repeated again. The whole time, Lapras had been continually assaulting it with an Ice Beam, intent on keeping it distracted while I check it out. I snapped the Pokédex shut, pocketed it, and snapped my finger. Lapras halted her attack. Take to the waves and give it a surf attack. Lapras, go! Dutifully, my fateful Pokemon dove into the water, dragging along behind her a torrent of foamy wash that doubled in size as she swam out deeper before looping back around. As she came closer to the shore, the sand shelf began to bolster the waves up until she was riding atop of them, with all 4 flippers urging the tidal force faster. Lapras came crashing down on top of the Pokemon in a raging flood of salty ocean water, her full weight plus that of the wave bearing down on it. With wide, disbelieving eyes, I watched my girl be tossed aside as though she were a rag doll. The attack never even made contact with the Rhydon imitation. It parted around the rock type, as though something had just split the wave in two. Lapras came crashing to the sand, skidding to a halt a dozen feet or so in front of me. I raced up to her, checking to make sure she was alright. Looking no worse for wear, I gave her a quick embrace before she rounded once more to the thing that had swatted her like a fly. What I saw next, I can't even understand myself. The Rhydon, or whatever it was, started shimmering in a glow that made evolution pale in comparison. It was beautiful, beyond belief. There came a series of warm, pleasant breezes that pulsed off its shining form, that brushed past the two of us like calm summer's day. This was when it all went south. The glowing Pokemon began to grow and distort. While it would never reach the supposed 80 feet that some had reported, it grew to a massive height that had me craning my neck backwards just to look at the whole thing. When the shine faded, I can barely begin to describe what I was looking at. It looked, for all intents and purposes, like someone had banged up an old television screen to the point where it would show nothing but static. Interspersed throughout the static, however, were the strangest shapes and symbols I'd ever seen. Even comparing them to the unknown in the Alpha Ruins couldn't come close to matching. These patterns flickered all over its constantly shifting body, if you could even call it that, as various parts of it seemed to fade in and out of existence at random. I had no clue what I was looking at. All I know was that this thing terrified me. I tried the Pokédex once more. No Pokemon data. And like that, Dexter basically exploded in my hand. I reached down with my other, cradling my now injured hand as I dropped the Pokédex. The Pokeball that I'd been holding in the other plunked into the sand with nary a sound. Without warning, the abomination of a Pokemon loosed a cry. The sound and volume of countless garbled Pokemon voices filled my ears. It was a sound of absolute abject terror-inducing magnitude. I don't remember if it was then that we decided to flee. I can't even recall how far we made it before the noise gave out. All I know is that I was horrified beyond all rational thought. Somewhere in the distance, someone was calling for help. They'd seen it too, but there was nothing to be done now. A tremendous gust of wind blew me off my feet as I fled. I remember being caught out of the air by Lapras, swinging down from her mouth as she let go of my vest. I clung to her neck tightly, all the while just hoping to get away. We didn't even see it coming until it was too late. There was a flash, and another aurora erupted down the beach ahead of us, quicker than lightning. The monster came swooping past, blowing up huge gouts of sand in its wake. I felt myself go airborne for the second time that day, landing hard on my back in the sand. As I sat up, rubbing my sore head, I could feel the burning pain in my left hand slowly ebbing away from where the dex had practically tried to melt itself to my glove, bringing it down for inspection. I think that's when I started to snap. Just like the damaged Pokeballs I'd read about, my hand was beginning to float away, in tiny, perfectly square glowing fragments that would levitate up and vanish in a shimmering flash of light. I could only stare at it as it kept happening until there was nothing left below the wrist. Somewhere in my mind, a stuck gear clicked, and I looked at Lapras. On the beach, my poor Pokemon was suffering a similar fate, but to a much greater degree. My hand all but forgotten, I rushed over to my beautiful girl and knelt down to her, placing my head next to hers as before my very eyes, she was being disassembled into nothingness. Together we stayed like that, until the last pieces of my precious water baby had vanished into thin air. The mysterious Pokemon had disappeared by this point, leaving me alone to try and piece together everything that had just happened. I sat there, in something of a mental shock for what felt like hours, looking between where Lapras had just been, and at the remaining stump of my left wrist. I know the police came and combed the beach, even running past me now and again like I wasn't there. Nurse Joy eventually arrived on the scene and retrieved me from my place in the sand. While she was a Pokemon healer, she was also Cinnabar Island's main medical resource as well. I underwent questioning when Officer Jenny eventually came round to Pokemon Center to see how I was faring, and to deliver what was left of my ruined Pokedex. I don't remember much, but what struck me as odd was that neither of them seemed to realize that I was missing my hand, like it had been gone the whole time or something. I was still in stunned silence about it, my mind further attempting to try and make sense of what I'd seen. Though Officer Jenny tried to ask me what happened, I wasn't there. At least, I think that's the best way to describe it. I spent the next 2 days on Cinnabar Island, attempting to recover from the battle. I didn't eat or sleep. I just sat there in one of the recovery rooms, trying to understand. When I did finally manage to find my voice, I think all I did was scream for however long it took me to lose it again in the hoarseness. It had taken Nurse Joy's Chansey and 2 Wigglytuffs singing in concert just to lull me to sleep that night. When I awoke the next morning, I at least had enough sense of mind to start asking questions. I spoke with Nurse Joy at length about the attack, but when I tried to explain to her what had happened, I couldn't believe her reaction. You checked in with only 5 Pokemon when you got here. Charizard, Blastoise, Venusaur, Pikachu and Snorlax. No Lapras. When we found you on the beach after Rhydon attacked, you were just kind of stunned. It was as if she had forgotten. I tried to show her my missing hand, just to prove my story. She shrugged it off as though it had always been gone. There was no physical damage after all. If anyone were to look at it, just a rounded nub of taut skin where the appendage used to be. It was like it had been surgically removed, and the skin grafted with such perfection to have never been disturbed at all. When I tried to have her review the check-in log, my panic rose even further. There were only 5 Pokemon listed with me. I knew that it couldn't have been faked. The computers were infallible in that respect, unless someone had purposely tampered with the log. The machine checked each Pokeball presented specifically for the Pokemon inside, and I know I turned them all in for a good rest after the trip to the island. My hand flew to my belt to feel for Lapras's Pokeball, but that too had vanished. None of it made any sense. The longer I stared at the log, the less I was convinced that what I was seeing was real. And then, I saw it. It was only a momentary flicker on the screen, just in the bottom corner, punctuated by the tiniest of sounds through the speakers as its shrill cry wavered in the recess of the depths of my mind. The mystery Pokemon was there. I backpedaled so fast, I ended up knocking over both Nurse Joy and a Chansey before hitting the ground with a hard slap of flesh on tile. My breath caught my throat and my heart raced. Nurse Joy asked if I was alright, but my voice was once again lost in terror. I stood up, keeping an eye on the monitor as I backed away slowly from the computer, never once taking my eyes off of it. When I felt the front door of the Pokemon Center on my back, I spun around and threw the doors open as fast as I could, and ran outside into the city. Yet, it was there too, flickering in and out of an existence just beyond the range of sight down the street. Reflected off a glass storefront, I heard that horrendous cry once again. That was all it took to get me moving. I flew down the streets to the northern coast. Upon reaching the sands, I released Blastoise from his Pokeball, hopped on and commanded him to get us out of there. I can only imagine the face of the startled beachgoers on the northern shore as we rocketed out of there across the water as fast as Blastoise could take us. Finally, as the island disappeared into the distance, my unease began to settle. We were getting far away from that monster. This would be one trainer that would live to tell the tale. For the 2-day trip home, I didn't spot the thing a single time. As we pulled into the southern coastline of Pallet Town, I finally felt a bit more relaxed. Even the complex situation with my missing hand seemed to be fading from my mind. Returning Blastoise to his Pokeball, I immediately took what was left of my Pokedex to Professor Oak. When he saw the burnt out, half-melted piece of machinery, he could barely believe his eyes. I watched as he hooked up the remainder of the memory core to his computer to try and find the Pokemon culprit responsible for destroying his genius invention. The professor spent 5 hours that day trying to piece together the severely damaged data that the Dex had recorded. For the most part, I sat out in the waiting room in his main office as I continued piecing together the fragments of memory I retained from the incident. He came out partway through his investigation, and I tried to relate to him the things that had happened. I told him everything, from the initial encounter to when one of my best and closest friends essentially evaporated in front of my eyes. Professor Oak took it all in stride, only showing the barest hint of any emotion outside of intrigue when I began to tear up at the still fresh wound in my heart. It wasn't the sympathy one might have expected though. He wore a look of pure confusion. I'd even tried showing my hand as well, but just like Nurse Joy, he seemed to pass it off as though it had always been gone. When he returned to finish with the Pokedex, I remained behind like before. There was nothing I could do but contemplate my experience. I couldn't take it. Just sitting there was going to drive me even more mad if I let it. So, I took it upon myself, just then, to see what Oak had dug up about the remains of my Dex. The cry reverberated all throughout the interior of the lab. I froze on the spot as it did, looking all around for the source in a panic. That is the most peculiar sound I've ever heard. The professor was staring down at his desktop monitor, scrolling through what little data he'd managed to retrieve. Along with the sound file of the monster, he'd managed to glean a little bit of information out of the melted hardware that was my Pokedex. Relaxing only just slightly, I approached the screen and took a look for myself at what it had to say. Pokedex entry 000, missing no. Height unknown. Weight unknown. Habitat unknown. Footprint data unknown. Cry sound file recovered. Data not enough information. Pokedex entry incomplete. Data file missing no. Contains corrupted data. Could not extrapolate. What does this all mean? I pondered aloud. Professor Oak continued to ponder the information on the monitor, his hand to his chin in thought. Well, from what I can tell, what we have here is a glitch in the Pokedex. What it's telling me is that there's corrupted data in a file that doesn't exist. While I personally programmed the Pokedex, even I can't explain this. I checked the police report from Cinnabar Island that was submitted, and something did indeed attack you. But what was it? That's the mystery here. Certainly no Rhydon could have done this to my invention. As if it needed reminding, he waved a hand towards the melted red steel casing of Dexter. So, this missing node does exist then, I asked. Oak nodded. The fact that it's labelled as missing node just means that there's data in the Pokedex that's been saved as free space for backup data, just in case. When you tried to analyse this Pokemon, that extra data space was accessed. The Pokedex tried to create an entry based on data that doesn't exist, instead of examining the Pokemon that attacked you. So that's why it exploded then? Quite. It can only get so far before the processor inside overheat from the strain of attempting to try and compute something that it wasn't made to handle. It caused so much of a draw on the system's power unit that the core collected far too much energy. Since that energy couldn't be routed into the desired processes, seeing as the Pokedex isn't meant to create data based on its scans, it all pulled into one place instead of looping back to the power pack. Oak sighed as he brought the wreckage up to his eyes for inspection. The system, though, wound up in a feedback loop trying to create and analyze data at the same time, continuously trying to draw more power for its processing, and the explosion was the result. Truth be told, even if I had been in my right frame of mind, Professor Oak's long-winded explanation still would have been hard to wrap my head around. Of everything that had come of it though, at least I had a name for my nightmare now. Missing No. Before I left for the day, Oak provided me with a new Pokedex for continued use in case I ever ran into the beast again. This one, however, had been cleared of all the backup space needed for the extra data storage. In theory, if I ever ran into Missing No, the new Dex should have been able to classify it a lot easier than the old model have had. While the newer model Pokedex was nice, I didn't intend to ever go looking for that bastard again. I decided to return home to see my mum that night. I was in Pallet Town after all. Surely, if there was anyone who'd realised that something was wrong with her son, it'd be my own mother. But just like everyone else, Mum didn't seem fazed by my missing hand. When I asked her about it, she couldn't quite explain it. She was not, however, acting like it was anything out of the ordinary. Nothing I said could convince her that I was missing my hand. It was all too bizarre for me. It seemed like there was nothing left to do but retire for the evening. No matter how strange the last week had been, I could do nothing to convince anyone that something was definitely wrong. As I lay in bed, contemplating my position, I could find no way to prove anything. Even after searching through my family photos that night, I discovered that each and every one of them was missing something. Particularly, that one part of myself I was now staring at. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the stump of my left wrist as I fell asleep that night. I woke the next morning to the sound of pots and pans clanging around in the kitchen downstairs. Rolling out of bed, I got dressed as quickly as I could, fumbling with any buttons or laces. That would quickly have to change if I was going to continue on like this. I walked downstairs to see my mother busily preparing breakfast for the two of us, the way she might have done if I'd set out on my journey some 4 years prior. It was calming normalcy of that kept my mind off the insanity of my situation at the time, as I sat down at the table and vaguely half listened to the television. The news was broadcasting their usual drivel. There had been nothing of interest according to the news anchor, save for one reported incident of an out-of-sorts Rhydon attack on Cinnabar Island. I scoffed at that, even as the anchor related the story. As Mum brought over a plate piled with pancakes, I cast the television from my attention and uneasily settled in to begin breakfast. That was until I heard it. It was the briefest of interruptions, but static flared across the television, and by the time I turned to look at the TV, it was as though nothing had happened. Cautiously, I kept an eye on the screen to see if it would happen again. After a few moments of peace on the broadcast screen, I returned my attention to the breakfast before me. It flickered again. This time, when I spun to face the television set, I caught just the barest of glimpses before the static cut back to the picture. The shifting symbols were there. Intent not to let my nerves get the better of me, I decided it was nothing. Just a simple flashback, probably post-traumatic stress. I did just lose one of my favourite Pokemon. Not to forget a part of myself. I'd probably be jumping at stack for a few weeks to come yet. Beside that, I'd left that thing far behind on Cinnabar Island. There was no way it could find me here. The TV flickered yet again, just as I turned to continue my breakfast. Out of the corner of my eye, there it was. The beast, missing no, was plastered all over the screen for as long as it took me to train my eyes on it, before it vanished once more. Now I knew I wasn't seeing things. That bastard had followed me. Without any word of warning, I got up and ran outside into the gloomy light of an overcast day. The wind was blowing in gusts, heralding an incoming storm. If only Mother Nature knew just how right she was. I had to get out of there. Everyone was at risk while I was around. So, I did what anyone would do when they found out an omnipresent super being bent on their utter destruction was tracking them like sportsmen in a Vulpix hunt. I ran. I didn't stop running. I couldn't. Everywhere I went, I would see it, just out the edges of my peripheral vision. It was stalking me. I traced my path through Kanto region, from back when I'd just begun my Pokemon journey. I hid out in the abandoned power plant outside of Cerulean City for a few days, sequestered myself away in Rock Tunnel, thinking that the presence of all those Onix would keep it at bay. No matter where I went though, it always seemed to get there before me. While making my way back up through Celadon City, I saw a poster for a carnival, featuring an all-Eevee and Eeveelution act. That brought my mind to an entry in the Pokedex I'd made while I was in the Johto region. Quickly typing it up, I found just what I was looking for. Pokemon number 196, Espeon. Data, the Sun Pokemon. It uses its fine hair that covers its body to sense air currents. By reading air currents, it can predict things such as the weather or its foe's next move. The tip of its forked tail will quiver when it does so. Fortunately for me, I had acquired an Eevee or two during my travels. It would be a small matter to train one up until it evolved. Stopping by a Pokemon Center, I had Oak transfer me one for the duration of my trip. Let me tell you, I spent the next few weeks getting real close to that Eevee. It would be my saving grace. At least, so I hoped. By the time it had evolved into an Espeon, I had been chased out of every major city in both the Kanto and Johto regions by Missing No. It seemed to be hunting me, no matter where I went. Now though, I had an early warning system. Espeon quickly learned how to pick up on Missing No's movements. Before I would even realise the bastard was there, my little Espeon would be on top of things and alerting me to its presence. There would be no way for it to sneak up on me now. For a time, I travelled in relative ease with my newfound companion. Espeon quickly meshed with my team, despite him having a lack of significant time to spend with them. After all, we were constantly on the run from the beginning of his stay with us. Through all of it though, we prevailed and managed to stay ahead of the beast. And that's when you showed up. I thought I could finally relax for a while. I even returned to the Pokemon League headquarters for a few days, stopping in to see if things had changed there. What do I hear when I do? Some kid trying to work his way through the Johto League to make it to the Indigo Plateau, and he was crushing all opposition, just so he could have a shot at me. To become the next Pokemon champion. You know, it'd been so long since I'd even thought about that. How many challenges had come and gone in my absence? How many were waiting in line for their turn at the Great Red of Pallet Town? This was not the time for such confrontations, and I knew it. So I left once again. I abandoned my title. I couldn't afford to waste time and effort on such things anymore. Staying in one place meant death. It meant the end of my existence. I told them that I'd go training somewhere. Mount Silver sounded like a good place to make my stand, if any. With plenty of high-level Pokemon to give me an advanced warning, and Espeon by my side to do that with even greater strength, I doubt the bastard would even make it to me. Surely, with enough Pokemon against him, he'd back down eventually, right? So I set out. I scaled Mount Silver. It took me almost 2 weeks, but we made it to the top. For a while, things were comfortable. There was ample food to be had from scavenging the forest, and I could see for miles around me. Nothing was going to sneak up on me. Not one single solitary thing. And there you were. I have to give you credit, kid. I don't know your name, but I imagine that you'd make one heck of a friend. I've abandoned all of mine, saved my Pokemon so long ago that it feels like forever since I came to the top of this mountain. But here you are, staring me down, waiting for the one battle that you won't let be. All because you have to be the very best, just like I did. I give in, knowing that there's no escaping it. I say nothing as the battle begins, standing there with what you'd believe to be one hand in my vest pocket, tugging my hat down over my eyes, saying nothing as my Pokemon beat against yours relentlessly. I've said it before, I don't need to give my Pokemon orders. Our bond is too deep for such trivial things anymore. They know what I want, just like I understand them without speaking their language. As the pitched war rages on, it's almost like I can feel him coming. I might have had a barrier of the strongest wild Pokemon in existence between him and me, if you hadn't destroyed him on the way up. I don't even have Espeon to warn me anymore. You saw to that too. The poor thing's knocked out cold in his Pokeball from the sound thrashing your Typhlosion gave it. The wind whips up around us at the summit of Mount Silver, and still the fight continues, until all I have left is my Pikachu. Having had him the longest of any of my Pokemon, it's no surprise that he takes out more than 3 of yours in a few swift maneuvers. It's down to the wire now, and there he is. You'll never see him. You won't notice him. For that, you should be grateful. You owed me hunting you, my worthy foe. He's here for me. As Pikachu goes tumbling into the snow-crusted mountain beneath us, lying at my feet, I humbly accept my defeat. I say nothing as you turn around and begin your hike back down the mountain, seeing the harbinger of my destruction materializing out of thin air like a phantom that I just can't seem to understand the rhyme or reason of. As I watch your retreating form through its shapeless mass, I can't help but wonder, if I'd been satisfied with that final victory, would I have been here now? Just for the sheer want of any kind of explanation why. I pull the new Pokedex out of my pocket and flip it open, pointing it at missing No. No Pokemon data found, it droned in its casual robotic voice. Closing my eyes and Pokedex as well, I feel that familiar tingling numbness begin to creep over my body. I wonder, what's it going to be like? Thank you for sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to leave a like. And if you want to hear more stories like it, don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon. That way you'll never miss a story. Oh, and if you haven't already, don't forget to follow me on Twitter so you can keep up with the latest goings on the channel.